Francesco Starace, Chief Executive of Enel, thank you so much for joining us. Now, really, Enel is the first issuer, was the first issuer to tie some of its bond coupons to climate goals, and also converted some of its loans to tie your interest to similar ESG targets. So you were really at the forefront of this movement. How much more will we see the industry do these types of transactions in 2021?
I think you will see a lot of it. It's picking momentum, it's picking speed. It's not only going to be bonds, as it was at the very beginning, SDG-linked bonds. We see also loans. We see also potentially swaps. And we see a lot of all kind of commercial paper also linked to that. So, in fact, we published a framework to cover the whole array of financial instruments. And I see other companies are doing that. Every day there is an announcement. I think I also saw a sovereign state, Uruguay was the first to issue a SDG-linked bond for the country itself. So it's a big movement, picking speed.
But can I ask you why you were the first one? You were among the first ones, and actually why now it's really taking off? What's changed?
I think what's changed is that the amount of effort, the amount of capital that needs to be raised for this kind of transition cannot be managed only through a very narrow tool, which was the green bonds. I mean, green bonds were the first papers linked to some kind of sustainable content, and which was basically only renewable. And it was very cumbersome as a tool and not completely usable for many other purposes by companies that had nothing to do with it. So I think it's the appetite and the need. So on one side, the need of capital. On the other side, the fact that there is a lot of appetite for investors for this kind of instruments. And so the two things now meet. We were the first to issue SDG bonds, you're right. But I think it's just because we were early in this. I mean, it's, like always in these things, once you've invented something, you wonder, why didn't you do it earlier than that? I mean,
yeah. What do you think changed actually in investor appetites? Does the pandemic play a role as people worry about their future more and the future of the world?
Look, I think that it was already there before the pandemic, honestly. It was already picking up momentum before the pandemic. The question is, why is it so hot? I think there is something to do with perception of risk. The SDG, or the sustainability profile, is a way of de-risking your investment in the face of mounting perception of risk coming from the turbulence on the technology side. So your investors, you have this big technology thing that moves in directions that are really difficult to predict. So you try to cling to something, and sustainability is that something that gives you comfort. So there is a way of de-risking your investment, and that's sustainability, big time. On top of which, you can say there is also unethical content, but I would say the risk perception is really the big thing.
I know you've always been one of the great thinkers in really how to tackle climate change. So what is now, 2021, the correct way to cut global emissions?
I think there is a very clear indication to the fact that to decarbonize, you need to electrify. And that is because you can decarbonize electricity. So the more you electrify your energy consumption, the better you are, because electricity can be decarbonized, and that's a given, it's a fact. So as long as you put stuff into electricity and you're sure that this electricity is progressively decarbonized, you not only decarbonize the power segment, but you decarbonize whole industry and economic sectors. So the electrification of energy consumption is the most powerful way of decarbonizing. It will not go through the 100%. There will still be something missing at the end, but it is the shortest way to go right now. And we need to do that because there's no more time to lose.
But how would you invest then in clean energy right now? For example, what's the role of hydrogen, and what's the right way to look at it now?
Hydrogen is a very expensive material to have if you want to have it decarbonized. So the way to go is to push technology to reduce the cost of green hydrogen, the hydrogen produced by electrolysis, by half, basically, and that can be done. I think it is something that is within reach of the industry in the next 5 years. So if we get to there, if we get to this point, then the best way to go is to decarbonize the present use of hydrogen. What hydrogen we're producing today has an atrocious carbon footprint. It's the yearly emissions of the UK and Indonesia put together every year just for the hydrogen we all use today. You know, our chemical industries and so forth. So first thing is take that hydrogen and decarbonize it by changing to electrolysis. Then after you've done that, you can start and use hydrogen to do other things that today require potentially hydrogen to be fully decarbonized. But if you forget that, you just kid yourself. You still have a lot of CO2 coming from the present use of hydrogen. So it's a big effort. Technology can help, and I think the world is really pushing in that direction. So I think for us it's great news because green hydrogen requires a lot of renewable energy, and I think it's great for us.
Francesco, how difficult is it, first of all, to modernize public and private buildings with smart energy, but also spread electric mobility?
I think electric mobility is a fact. It's a question just to ramp up production of cars and make them competitive, which is something that the industry will probably get to in the next couple of years. So it's there, it's done. It's not done, but you will see this picking up speed in ways that are not today completely understood. On the electricity side, I always say the boring part, the part of the charging stations, which is not as funny and sexy as a car, we are very active in putting down a lot of charging stations and privately owned or publicly owned, so that drivers of electric cars do not have this anxiety of being stranded somewhere with their car looking for a plug. But for us, this is a minor investment. It's certainly important, but in the context of our yearly investments, it's a tiny part, and it's not a difficult one. Just a question of doing it and getting ready when cars are finally rolling on the road. This will happen probably. You will see in 5 years. You and I, if we would talk again about this, but it will probably go. It's gone. We will talk about something else, but you will see that this is just normal life, and this will happen without major disruption in our daily life.
So what you're talking about, these charging, I mean, it's important to have critical mass quite quickly, right? Some of the questions, what are some of the questions that you're asking?
It's a chicken and egg story, because there is not a business case for public infrastructure if there are not enough cars around. And who buys a car if there is not a public infrastructure charging it? So who comes first? And if you look at it, it's our interest to have electric cars on the road, so we put down the charging stations. And we know cars are going to be there. So it's just a question of betting a little bit in order to have a lot of reward a little later, which is what the industry needs to do sometimes. It's nice to be safe and clear of danger, but sometimes you have to stick your neck out a little bit and to put down infrastructure in order to have this electric transportation explosion is fundamental for the industry. I'm not talking only about cars. I'm talking about buses in all our cities. I'm talking about trucks, everything moving on wheels.
Is there a template on how to do it? I don't know whether you roll it out to a city and then see what works and what doesn't. And, in which part of the world is that city? How does it work?
It works out if you look at the country. You need to look at the country story. Who buys a car if he can only drive it in a certain area of the country where he lives? Typically, you buy a car and you think you will be driving it for miles and miles, which never happens, but it's in your mind. So you need to give the drivers certainty that they can drive 1,000 kilometers and have still charging station on the way. So you need to electrify the country in which you choose to be. And that's what we're doing in Italy. That's what we do in Spain, in Romania. We're now starting all the Latin American charging stations. If you want to drive your electric car from Tierra del Fuego, from the southern tip of Latin America to Los Angeles, you can do it today because we have electrified all the Pan American highway from the south to the north, which is crazy, but we did it just to demonstrate that things can be done.
But if there are too many, or if there are more of those electric cars, how much more difficult will it be for everyone to be able to charge it when they want?
you will have to put more and more chargers. It's very simple. So it's something that, distribution networks are good at doing that. I can tell you, an electric charger is like a large, medium-sized restaurant or a large bar or a large pub as far as the energy consumption is concerned. So are we concerned about how many restaurants or bars are going to be opened in the next couple of years? No, we just do that. It's normal life for us. So we'll put down as many chargers as needed. It's not a big deal.
Francesco, talk to me also about the Climate Finance Leadership Initiative, of which Enel is actually part. Now, it released a report on policies that emerging market governments should be looking at and should be considering to boost climate finance. What should be number one on their priority list?
I think for countries that want to attract investment from private sector, the key word is the risk the country perception, which comes in two ways. Set up legal and regulatory frameworks that people can understand and trust, which is not that difficult. If you look at it, there's lots of good practices that you can copy paste or try to adapt to your reality. And number two, have, at least at the very beginning of this process, some kind of an umbrella agreement with the World Bank or the IMF that will, let's say, serve as a door opener and encouragement for the first 2-3 cases on foreign investment. After that is done, the herd will follow and you're okay. So it's very simple, it's not that difficult, and there are good examples that show that this is possible. And then, of course, there's a lot of taxonomy, private partnership and stuff like that. But these are the really two big door openers. Legal and regulatory frameworks, understandable and people can trust. Some kind of, at the initial phase, some kind of an umbrella protection from the World Bank and the IMF that gives comfort to the first courageous investors, and that's it.
We were just talking about some of the recharging stations, but away from that, what are some of the other opportunities that you're seeing in terms of infrastructure for emerging markets specifically?
I think in the emerging markets, everything is needed. The fact is that population growth happens in emerging markets, and that population more growth happens in cities in emerging markets. We always think of emerging markets as rural places. They're not at all rural places, and they're increasingly metropolitan monsters places. So what happens in these large metropolitan areas of the emerging world shapes the emerging world. And what happens in these cities shapes climate more than we think. Cities today account for 70% of world energy demand and 78% of global emissions. That is all about cities. I know that seems strange, and I tell you, the word city doesn't do justice to what they are. They are metropolitan monsters. So the approach is how to make these cities livable, less impactful, more friendly for people, and more sustainable from an electricity standpoint and from an energy standpoint. That's our main concern. And that's really for us a big task, but also a huge potential opportunity. Because even if those cities are populated by people whose buying power today is low, our idea is that in the next 20 years, they will become extremely important customer locations. And that's where wealth is going to be created going forward. So it's great to be there, and it's tough to fix these problems, but it has incredible rewards going forward. And it's fundamental if you want to really do something for climate change.
What have you learned about the private-public partnerships actually in some of these places?
They can work, provided that both the public and the private tell the truth one to the other. What is the nature of your engagement is fundamental. And to do that, you need to understand each other and be open about what you try to achieve. I think it's fundamental. But other than that, it's working. If you're clear about what you want to do and you understand that the other guy is also clear about what he wants to do, it works, always.
Can you roll out capital market solution for emerging markets?
Yeah, I think emerging markets are, for example, an incredible source of opportunity for sustainable finance, looking for application and looking for cases where to invest. There is everything is there. It's not only about energy; it's about all kind of infrastructure, even consumer goods. I mean, it's everything is booming there. So, if you want to have a sustainable profile in emerging markets, you get a double whammy, because you get the hunger of customers that want to achieve and to have services that are today given here, but they're special there, and you get the benefit of getting credit because you do something in the sustainable direction. So it's a fantastic playground for sustainable finance application. It's amazing.